June 8, 1972, a highway outside Trang Bang, South Vietnam. The morning air is thick with humidity and the rumble of artillery. 9-year-old Phan Thị Kim Phúc is running. Her clothes have burned away. Her skin is on fire. Behind her, black smoke rises from her village where napalm has just been dropped. She is screaming. She does not know a photographer has raised his camera. She does not know that in 1/20th of a second, the shutter will click, and the world will never look away again. This is the story of the photograph that ended a war. By 1972, the United States had been fighting in Vietnam for 7 years. 58,000 American soldiers were dead. The war had shattered a presidency and divided a nation, and still it continued. The Pentagon had one strategy: control the narrative. Embed journalists, stage press conferences, flood televisions with footage of victories. They believed if Americans saw the war their way, they would support it forever. They were wrong. Television had changed everything. For the first time, war entered American living rooms in real time. Families watched soldiers die over dinner. The government could control press releases. It could not control what people felt. By 1971, 60% of Americans wanted withdrawal. The Pentagon Papers had revealed years of lies. Trust was gone. But the war machine kept turning. What the government needed was for Americans to stop looking. They almost got their wish. Then June 8th happened. Trang Bang was a small village northwest of Saigon, caught between South Vietnamese forces and retreating North Vietnamese troops. South Vietnamese planes spotted what they believed was an enemy camp. They called in an airstrike. What they hit was not a military target. It was a pagoda where civilians, including children, had taken shelter. The napalm fell at 9:08 a.m. 21-year-old Nick Ut was there. A photographer for the Associated Press, he had covered the war for 4 years. Bodies, bombings, burned villages. He thought he was numb. He was not. As the smoke cleared, Ut saw children running from the pagoda. Some were burned, some were screaming. Then he saw her, a naked girl, maybe 9, running toward him, arms outstretched, skin peeling from napalm burns. Ut raised his Leica. The shutter clicked. 1 frame, 1/20th of a second. Then Ut did something that would define his life. He put down the camera. He ran to her. He poured water on her burns. He convinced soldiers to let her into their vehicle. He drove her to a hospital 30 minutes away. She was not expected to survive. Kim Phuc lived. And the photograph he had taken in the seconds before he saved her was already on its way to changing history. The image reached the AP bureau within hours. Editors almost did not publish it. Their concern was not the horror, it was that the girl was naked. Standards in 1972 were strict. They debated for hours. Finally, the bureau chief made the call. The world needed to see it. It appeared on front pages across the globe within 24 hours. The New York Times ran it above the fold. Le Monde published it with a one-word headline, Vietnam. Networks broadcast it in prime time, with warnings that did nothing to soften its impact. The reaction was volcanic. In Washington, senators who had supported the war demanded withdrawal. Anti-war protests swelled by tens of thousands. In Middle America, families who had trusted their government looked at the photograph and asked a question they had never asked before. What are we doing over there? The Pentagon moved to contain the damage. They issued statements claiming the attack was justified, the photograph out of context. They sent officials onto television to explain that napalm was necessary, that civilian casualties were unavoidable, that the war was being won. No one was listening anymore. The photograph had done something no briefing could undo. It made the abstract concrete. For years, Americans had heard about collateral damage as statistics, numbers in reports, lines in speeches. The photograph made them look at one child, one scream, one moment of agony no spin could explain away. The war had a face now, and the face was 9 years old. The Pentagon did not give up. A quiet campaign began to discredit the image. Officials suggested it had been staged. They pointed out, correctly, that the South Vietnamese Air Force, not the Americans, had dropped the napalm, as if that absolved a war the United States had created, funded, and directed. The campaign failed. Witnesses confirmed the attack. Medical records verified the injuries. The staging theory collapsed, but the damage was done. In October 1972, 6 months after publication, Kissinger and Le-Duc Tho reached a preliminary peace agreement. The deal fell apart, but the momentum for withdrawal was unstoppable. In January 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed. American combat operations ended. The last troops left in March. South Vietnam fell in April 1975. But the American chapter, the chapter that had killed 58,000 Americans and millions of Vietnamese, was over. Historians debate whether the photograph alone ended the war. Wars are complex, but what is not debatable is this. The photograph changed what Americans were willing to accept. It turned support the troops into bring them home. It turned necessary sacrifice into unacceptable horror. It made the war impossible to sell, and the Pentagon knew it. Nick Ut won the Pulitzer Prize in 1973. He was 22, the youngest ever. But the Pulitzer did not bring peace. For decades, he was haunted by the moment he put down his camera. He had saved her life, but he could not stop seeing her in the viewfinder. He could not stop hearing the scream the photograph had frozen, but the world had never heard. Kim Phuc's story was harder. She survived the burns, but survival was not living. 17 surgeries over 14 years, permanent scars, constant pain. The North Vietnamese government, recognizing the propaganda value of the napalm girl, paraded her at events, made her a symbol. She was not allowed to be a person. In 1986, while studying in Cuba, she defected during a refueling stop in Canada. She settled in Toronto, married, had children, and slowly reclaimed her identity from the photograph that had defined her without her consent. She founded a foundation for child victims of war. She became a UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador, and she forgave. In 2016, 44 years after the photograph, Kim Phuc and Nick Ut reunited in Los Angeles. They embraced. They wept. UT said what he had been saying for decades. I cry every time I see the picture, but I am proud I saved her life. Kim Phuc said something different. That picture, she said, is not my story. My story is what came after. The photograph changed more than a war. It changed how wars are photographed. Before June 8th, military censorship was routine. After, that kind of control became impossible. One photograph, one person, one camera had overwhelmed an entire propaganda apparatus. The Pentagon responded by changing the rules. In future conflicts, journalists would be embedded, given access in exchange for oversight. The strategy was not to prevent photographs, it was to prevent the wrong photographs. In 2016, Facebook briefly removed the image, citing nudity policy. The backlash was global. Facebook reversed course within 24 hours. 50 years on, the photograph still has power. It still frightens institutions. It still demands to be seen. In an age of deep fakes, when any image can be generated and any reality simulated, the napalm girl stands as something rare. A moment that actually happened, captured by a person who was actually there, of a child who actually suffered. Nick Ut did not set out to change history. He set out to do his job. He photographed what he saw. He saved who he could. In the space between those two actions, one click, one act of compassion, he created something that outlasted governments, outlasted wars, and outlasted the lies that tried to bury both. The question is not whether photographs have power. They do. The question is whether we are still willing to look, whether we are still willing to see one child in one moment of agony and recognize that behind every statistic, behind every policy, behind every war, there is a human being who did not choose to be there. Kim Phuc did not choose to be the napalm girl. Nick Ut did not choose to be the photographer who captured her. But together they gave the world proof. Proof that war is not abstract. War is not strategy. War is not politics. War is a 9-year-old girl running down a highway, screaming while the world watches. And sometimes the world decides it has seen enough.